here, as I already mentioned this morning. Listen, if you are visiting with us and you don't have luncheon plans for after services, then the care group that Alex Payton and myself work with, we're going to be having a luncheon. And so if you have a place that you'd like to go, then we'd love to have you. We'd love to have the opportunity to meet you and to maybe get to know you a little bit better. And you can have a nice lunch to boot. So we'd love to have you with us. When I used to make trips to Africa without Lori, which went on for a number of years, on those mission trips, sometimes they would go anywhere from 4 weeks up to 6 weeks. And back in those days, there were no way of communicating. You couldn't make phone calls because those things didn't exist, at least going overseas to that degree. And if you did, it would be terribly expensive. You couldn't write letters because if you wrote a letter, you'd get home before the letter got home. And so there was no communication. And like I said, it would go anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks without any communication whatsoever. On the way back, we generally stop on one of the international airports in Europe to make a plane connection. Sometimes it would be in Amsterdam or in Zurich or Paris or something like that. Today, we stop in Paris on the way back, and as you'd get into those international airports, they'd have all kinds of shops inside the airport. I mean, they would have, high-end shops. For instance, at Charles de Gaulle International Airport, inside there, the many shops they had there, it's like being in a high-value type of shop, Mont Blanc and Rolex and Gucci and Dior and Chanel and things of that kind of nature that you go in and shop. It didn't take me very long to shop in those places because I couldn't afford almost anything that was in them. But I would go into some of the perfume shops, and I would go there for the purpose of trying to find Lori some kind of a gift, especially that of perfume. And one of the perfumes that she liked back in the day was Chanel No. 5. Sometimes she liked Eternity. There's other ones that are there. I've smelled a lot of them over the years, but there's something alluring and captivating, if you will, something very feminine about a perfume. And I loved to buy that, and I loved it when she would wear it because of that very thing. It was just something that was really nice to give. And what I was trying to say to her, without using words, was that I loved her and that I missed her. The other night, Lori and I were going to a dinner engagement, a dinner party, and as we went and were getting ready, Lori says to me, she goes, "Why don't you put on some of that cologne that I bought you?" She goes, I really like it on you, and I generally don't wear a lot of cologne because when you're around a lot of church people such as yourself, there are those who are, those kind of smells are offensive to them, so I don't wear the cologne because of it, but I love to wear cologne. And so she says, "Put some of that cologne on you. I like it. I like the smell of it on you," and so forth. And in a way, she was saying something to me, and what she was saying was that, she loved me without words. Or maybe she was saying that I smelled. I don't know. But regardless of that fact, she asked me to put something on. And so when you think about perfume or a fragrance, there's something that is delightful about that fragrance that is alluring. It's captivating. The sense of smell is one of the strongest senses that we have of our five senses. And when a fragrance is let loose in a room, there's no way that you can contain it. It's something that is just pervasive. It reaches out, oftentimes can even fill up a whole room and so forth. And so there's something wonderful about that very thought or a fragrance. I want you to hold that thought here. And next I want to ask you a personal question. And when you see the question, you're going to wonder, what does that have to do with perfume? Well, you'll get it as we go on down through the lesson. And the question is this: how pure, how deep, how extravagant would you say that your love for Christ is? Now, don't answer that thing really quickly because I'm asking you to really think about the question and your answer to the question. How pure, how deep, how extravagant is your love for Christ? In other words, if your love for Christ was represented by a bottle of costly perfume, how much of it would you be willing to pour out on Him? How much of it would you be willing to give up? Would you be willing to pour the whole bottle, to give it all? Or would you want to save maybe some of it back to, say, help someone that was poor? Or maybe you've been saving up for an item that you really, really want. How much of it would you be willing to give up? How much would you be to let go? How extravagant would you say your gift is? The word extravagant is an interesting word. The word extravagant means exceeding the bounds of reason in terms of actions, in terms of demands or opinions or passions. I want you to dial on two words on that definition. One is the word action, and the other one is the word passion. How much or how extravagant would your love be for Christ? In Jesus' day, a huge monetary premium was placed upon certain kinds of ointments or perfumes, spikenards and things of that nature. A lot of money was thought about, and the reason is because it was really rare. They'd travel to faraway places in order to extract a liquid from a certain kind of plant in order to make this certain kind of ointment or this perfume that would be extremely valuable. For instance, you might recall that the three wise men, when they came to Jesus, he was about 2 years of age, they came to him and they were bearing him gifts. They brought gifts such as gold and frankincense and myrrh. Those are very rare and valuable items worth a lot of money. They're extravagant. Some would say that the gifts that they gave to the baby Jesus and to his family were extravagant kinds of gifts. They exceeded the bounds of reasoning in terms of their action, in terms of the passion that was behind it. For instance, when you talk about gold, well, gold back in that day, as well as in our day, was a very rare commodity and very expensive. For instance, if you were to look at an ounce of gold today or purchase an ounce of gold today, it would cost you about $1,200, or determining on the fluctuation of the market, it would go up to even $1,900 for a single ounce. So back in Jesus' day, if you thought about gold being the equivalent of our day and the expense of it, then that was an extremely extravagant gift of gold. And I can almost guarantee you that they gave him more than just an ounce of gold. They gave him frankincense. Frankincense was, well, it was an item that was burned in the temple. And when they had burned that incense in the temple, then the aroma or the fragrance would lift high, and it said that it was pleasing to the nostrils of God. And so frankincense was another rare commodity that was extracted from a certain plant and so forth, and that it was burned as a pleasing aroma. Or myrrh. And myrrh is another word for expensive ointment or expensive perfume, if you will. And so what I'm saying to you is that when you talked about the three gifts that were given to Jesus by these wise men, they were rare and valuable gifts that they gave to the Christ child. Some would say extremely extravagant, and that would be a good word for it because that's exactly what it was. Well, that might open your Bibles, if you would, over to John, the 12th chapter. As you turn to John, the 12th chapter, you might want to put a finger or a marker in over at Mark, the 14th chapter, or Matthew, the 26th chapter, because these are parallel accounts. In this account, we find something that is there that I want you to see this morning, and that is extravagant love. There's going to be an expression of extravagant love that was shared with Jesus. And it's a wonderful story, and it has a significant spiritual emphasis to us today. Let me set the setting up for you before we get into the text itself. In that day, Jesus had been telling his disciples for some time now that he was going to be delivered over to the chief priests. They in turn would hand him over to the Gentiles, and they would mock him. They would spit upon him. They would scourge him. And Jesus said, and they will kill me, and on the third day I'll rise again. He said this numerous times. He said it in the 10th chapter of Mark, again in the 14th chapter of Mark, but it doesn't seem to resonate with these, or 12th chapter of Mark, but it doesn't seem to resonate with his apostles. They don't seem to be getting it. Maybe their minds were distracted by the kingdom. Maybe they're distracted by his teachings or the signs and miracles and the wonders that were going on at his hands. But regardless of that fact, they didn't seem to understand. They're almost oblivious to the fact that Jesus is telling them, listen, I'm going to die. Only one seemed to really get it, and it was a woman. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the thought was that Jesus is telling his disciples that he's going to be handed over, that he is going to die, that he's very serious about it. In fact, in a few days from our passage here, Jesus will die upon the cross. He will be delivered over to the authorities, just as he said that he would be. John tells us that it's 6 days before the Passover. The Passover, for our equivalents today that we might be able to get, is that the Passover would be much like our 4th of July. It had a religious connotation. Ours has a national kind of connotation, but it'd be something like that. There'd be a very celebrative mood. There'd be a very positive kinds of mood. People were extremely happy when the Passover was to come around and so forth. But in that day, and on this particular Passover, not everyone was excited. Not everyone was in a celebrative mood. There were those, the chief priests and the scribes, who, Mark the 14th chapter and verse 1 says, they were intent on scheming and finding a way that they might be able to capture Jesus by stealth and to kill him. And so in Jerusalem on that day, you had this sense of treachery that was amiss. But at the same time, there are those who, when they thought about this young rabbi Jesus, they had come to believe that he was exactly who he said he was over in John the 12th chapter in verse 11. And so in Jerusalem on that day, there was a celebrative mood, but there's also an electric kind of happening that's going on, but it's a divided city in terms of people's views about Jesus. Some wanted him dead, others were believing on him, and so forth. So you have that kind of mood that is set there on that day. And then we come to this passage of Scripture itself and the things that are going to be going on in that place. Jesus has been invited to a serene place that was a few miles out of Jerusalem called Bethany. And in Bethany, Levi, whom Jesus had healed of leprosy, decided that he wanted to throw a banquet or a dinner party for Jesus. Not for Jesus, but also for his apostles. So the guest at that dinner banquet was Jesus. There were the 12 apostles, Lazarus, whom Jesus had raised from the dead, and his two sisters, Mary and Martha. So there's a pretty good crowd that is there on that evening. So that's kind of the setting that goes around here. Now look at John the 12th chapter. John the 12th chapter. And in this section of Scripture, you'll see an expression of extravagant love. John 12, beginning in verse 1. Jesus, therefore, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they made him a supper there, and Martha was serving, but Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table with him. Mary, therefore, took a pound of very costly perfume of pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped it with his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, who was intending to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor people?" Now he said this not because he was concerned about the poor, but because he was a thief. And as he had the money box, he used to pilfer it for what was put in it. Jesus therefore said to her, "Let her alone, in order that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you have with you always, but you do not always have me." There you see an example of that. If you were to look over at Matthew the 14th chapter that we'll kind of refer to here as I go along here, you see some additional facts that are put in there, such as that it was done at the house of Levi, whom Jesus had healed. You'll also hear that the disciples, when she poured out this expensive perfume upon Jesus, you'll find that she also poured it out upon his head. Not just his feet, but his head. And you'll also see that it says that the disciples, they were indignant about what had gone on there, and they used the words like waste. Why this waste? Why have you wasted this perfume? It's a story of extravagant love to the nth degree. When you think about extravagancy as something that goes beyond the bounds of reason and has to do with action and passion, you see this in the life of Mary. There is an expression of extravagant love that she pours upon Jesus that was absolutely incredible. The scene is they're sitting reclining at the table, and as he sat reclining at the table or reclining on the floor, wherever they were reclining, they're sitting back. It says that Mary very quietly and silently walks into the room carrying an alabaster vial of pure nard or perfume. And it says that she goes up there and she pours it upon his head, as Matthew and Mark says. She pours it upon his head, anoints his feet, and it says that she wipes it with her hair. There's something else that is revealed there. It says that it was an expensive vial of perfume that she pours upon the head and upon the feet of Jesus. In fact, it says that it was extravagant, that it was worth over 300 denarii. To put that in context for which we could understand it is that a denarii was worth a day's wage. If you tell you that it's 300 denarii, then you're talking about 300 days' wages. Almost a year's worth of income was broken over the head of Jesus and his feet, and that he was anointed with this expensive, fragrant perfume. In Meridian, the median income of Meridian is around about $51,000. It can bounce up some in different areas and so forth, but that's what it is. And so If you were to think about that gift or the extravagant expression of love that Mary pours out upon Jesus, then you would be saying that she just poured out like $50,000 or $46,000 worth of perfume upon the head of Jesus. Let me ask you, would that seem to you to be just a little bit extravagant? Would you say that seemed to be way over the top, beyond bounds of reason and so forth? Well, most of us would be in agreement with what some of his disciples are going to say later, but nevertheless, there was something about Mary that she saw in Jesus that brought out this emotion, this passion, this action that caused her to express herself by pouring out this expensive perfume upon Jesus. The fragrance, it says, fills the whole room. You can't hold it back. It becomes obvious. It becomes noticeable without sound or without sight. The fragrance is pervasive. It invades the whole room, fills up the whole room, so there was no way that anyone could possibly miss it, because once released, there's no way of containing it. The question might be, well, why such extravagancy? Why the extravagant expression on the part of Mary? Well, you don't see it necessarily in this section of Scripture in John chapter 12, but you do see it over in Matthew or Mark the 14th chapter, where it becomes very, very clear. There it says, but Jesus said, let her alone. Why do you bother her? She has done a good thing to me. The poor you have with you always, whenever you wish. You can do good to them, but you do not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. So he talks about the purpose of why he did it. And so she took to heart what was going to happen to Jesus. Jesus had told his apostles, those closest to him, he's told them, listen, I'm going to die. I'm going to be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes. They're going to hand me over to the Gentiles, and they're going to mock me. They're going to spit on me. They're going to scourge me, and then they're going to kill me. But they are oblivious to it. But Mary, there's something sensitive, and I was talking to someone about this. I said, it has to be left to a woman that becomes more intuitive than what a man is about, because she gets it. She knows that the impending death is there. The other apostles, they're worried about the kingdom. They're worried about power. They're worried about other things. But she faces it, and it grieves her to the point of tears. And John tells us that she poured it over his feet, and she wipes it with her hair. You see, she wanted to do something that would communicate her love for Jesus. And she didn't know what else to do that would be equal to the value of what he had done in her life and what he'll continue to do in her life that caused this extravagant love to be expressed in this kind of a way. Here's what I believe. I believe that when she poured out that perfume, that she poured out more than just an ointment. When she poured out that perfume, she poured out her heart. A heart that's breaking over the fact that he's going to die. She pours out her love, a love that's unbounding for what Jesus had done in her life and in her family's life. He had raised her brother from the dead. He'd been dead 4 days, and he brings her back him back to life. Could you imagine how that must have affected her life and the promises that he made to them? So she pours out her devotion. So when she pours out this perfume, it's more than just perfume. She's talking about an extravagant heart, an extravagant love, an extravagant devotion that she wants Jesus to have. And Jesus, he responds to it because he saw it for what it was. He saw it as an extravagant love in preparation of his death. And only he got it, and only Mary got it, but the others had missed it. They were oblivious to it, but they got it. I got thinking about that, and I wrote this paragraph that is behind me that says, doubtless the fragrance that drenched his garment and lingered in the fabric would be reminding him subtly, even in the midst of betrayal, even in the desertion. Judas is going to betray him. All the apostles are going to desert him. Peter is going to deny him. The trials, the beatings, the mockings, the death, those things that were there, they would be a reminder about those who loved him purely and deeply and extravagantly. This perfume is going to soak into the fibers of what he is wearing. And not only that, but it'll be on his skin itself. So the other night when we went out, Lori says, please place some of that cologne on yourself. And so I had some St. Laurent's or something like that she likes. And so I went, yeah. But I didn't do that, not really. But anyway, I put some on. Well, you know, it not only got into my skin, but into my shirt that I was wearing. It permeated, and that's what's happening to Jesus. This is going to permeate not only his body, but the clothes, and it's going to be a strong reminder of him as he goes through these terrible things. He'll be wearing these garments through all this. And like I said, it'll be a subtle reminder, but he'll be reminded that someone loved him purely, deeply, extravagantly. Well, we would see it as an extravagant love, but not everyone on that evening thought of it as an extravagant love. Many thought of it as being an extravagant waste. And in fact, when the disciples, it says that they became indignant. That's what it says over in Matthew and Mark. They become indignant to this extravagant gift that is there. John is interesting. John, he's a little bit more, he gets more personal about it. Their words were, why are we wasting this perfume? What a waste. We could have been given this to the poor. But John, he singles out Judas. Judas seems to be the one who begins the conversation. Jesus was the first one to speak out about this wastefulness in his mind. And it seems as though all the other disciples catch up with him and they wade into the same kind of loathing that is in Judas's heart. And Judas will preach his first and his last sermon. And it's a short one because his words are this: why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor people? John tells us that he's being disingenuous. He's not being honest about this. He doesn't really care about the poor. Why? Well, because he'd been stealing from the treasury box all along. He'd been pilfering the treasury box. So he wasn't really concerned about the poor. He's got something else that's grinding on him. He's got something else that is bothering him. And so they scold Mary for her extravagant expression by pouring this stuff up on him. So why was Mary's act of love seen as a waste? Have you ever thought about what a waste is? When you waste something, for instance, would you say that if you put a diamond necklace around a pig that waddles in the mud, would you say you just wasted a bunch of diamonds? Most of us would think that. If you had a really nice steak and you just threw it out because you said, and you threw it into the garbage, would you not say that was a waste? What they're saying is that Jesus was not worth the extravagancy of the gift. In fact, he said, why shouldn't it have been given to the poor? Maybe there was something else of more value, so they didn't see the value of what Jesus was about. Could it be some jealousy on Judas's part? Maybe he was, maybe he was jealous of the fact that Jesus got so much attention and so forth, and because he was so popular. Maybe it's because Judas was a lover of money that he would start this kind of talk. Or maybe his words are nothing more than just pious rhetoric because of his dark plans. His dark plans are that he's going to betray Jesus anyway. So there's a lot of reasons that go around for why they thought of that as being over the top or being a waste of giving. But notice Jesus' response. And Jesus' response in Mark, the 14th chapter, and here in the 12th chapter of John, he says, leave her alone. Leave her alone. What she has done for me, this expression is a good thing. You guys haven't even done a modest thing for me. You haven't even addressed the fact that I'm going to die. There seems to be no sorrow in you over this fact here, but Mary, she pours out her heart. She pours out her devotion. She pours out her love in the form of this thing. And so Jesus says, she has done a good thing for me. You always have the poor with you, but I'm only here for a while. She's done a good thing to me. And he reveals the motive behind it. And the motive behind Mary's extravagant love is this. She is preparing him for burial. She's preparing him for death. And he knows that. And she knows it. The others don't know it, but they know about that. And because of that, Jesus is going to say something that is interesting. Mary's fragrant or extravagant expression of love will be told in memory of her. No one's going to forget about this. Jesus says, truly I tell you, Wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. And here we sit, me standing 2,000 years in the future from that day, and what are we talking about? We're talking about extravagant love. We're talking about great sacrifice. We're talking about great devotion. That's not what they're talking about then, but that's what we're talking about today. When you think of Mary, when you talk about that fragrance has drifted forward almost 2,000 years. If you think about it, if you were to take a deep breath, you could even smell it today. Mary. When you think of Mary, you think of sacrifice. When you think of Mary, you think of her love. When you think of Mary, you think of her devotion. Today, when parents have little girls, what do they sometimes name them? They name them Mary. Little Mary Kreider. Little Mary Gonzalez. Little Mary Blackmere. Little Mary Bossomer. We have 4 Marys in our congregation. There might be more, but those are the 4 that I could think of. You name them Mary, and you name it because it's a positive thing. But when you think of Judas, what comes to your mind? You think of a liar. You think of a thief. You think of a betrayer. And when parents have little boys, what do they name them? It's like Jezebel. They don't name them Judas. You might name a goat Judas. You might name a guinea pig Judas. But you'll never see a little boy named Judas, because there is an indignancy about that. There is derision that is associated with that name. And so we remember Judas, but it's never anything positive about Judas. So remember that question that I asked you a while back that I said you're not going to get until about right now. When I asked the question for you to think about personally, how pure, how deep, how extravagant is your love for Christ? Well, where is that in your life? How do you express your love for Christ? Well, I guess you do it in a lot of different kinds of ways. But one of the things is that what you give to Christ equals the measure of his worth in your eyes. So what is it that we give to Christ? Well, I've talked about it over the last 4 weeks, and I guess I'll just touch on it this week, but you give him your whole heart. You give him all your heart. In fact, Jesus said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all ounces of your being, all your heart. That doesn't leave anything else for anything else. It's to love him with all your heart. But there's always going to be a Judas that comes along and says, listen, you shouldn't give your heart completely over to the Lord. You ought to give your heart to your job. You ought to give your heart to friendships. You ought to give your heart to relationships. You ought to give your heart to hobbies. You ought to give your heart to a lot of things. I'm not saying any of those things are wrong, but when it comes down to how we look at Jesus in our lives as the Savior of our lives, then it should take on a different kind of tone. We give him all our heart. And when you give you all your heart, that's never a waste. You give him your time spent in spiritual things like prayer and studying of God's word and study of worship. Of course, there's always going to be a Judas that's going to come along and says, what a waste of time. You're wasting your time. The most expensive commodity that you have in your possession that you can only spend one time is your time. Why are you wasting your time on going to church? Why are you wasting your time on worshiping God? My friends used to say that to me. What a waste. What are you doing tonight, Richard? I'm going to church. What a waste. Didn't you just go Sunday morning? Yeah. And you're going Sunday night as well? Yeah. It's a waste. How about Wednesday night? Can't go out. I go to Bible study on Wednesday night. What a waste. People are going to say that to you. What a waste. You could be spending your time on really good things on Sunday, even like watching TV or playing video or going golfing or fishing or hunting or whatever. Valuable hours that you could spend rather than wasting your time on God. Come on. But I want you to know, when you use your time in that kind of way, it's an extravagant gift that you have given to God. Because he knows you can only spend it one time, and it's pleasing to him. Give him your talents serving other people, encouraging other people, teaching other people about how Jesus has touched your life. Yeah, there are going to be people like Judas who are going to come along and say, what a waste. You're wasting your talents. You have a lot of talents. Why are you wasting it on that religious stuff? Or give him your treasure. Well, that's a big one when you think about it. You know, to give your treasure to help the church, to grow the church, to reach out to those who are lost, to continue to preach the word and teach the word, to strengthen the fellowship, to be all together to one day be in heaven with God. There'll be those who say, what a waste. You know what? Judas would say, if you're throwing your money at the church, then let me tell you what, you might as well be just throwing your money down a rat hole because you'll never see it again. It's a waste. You could be using it on much more valuable things. You could be building up your savings account. You can be putting together IRAs, and you could be buying stocks, and you could be getting ready for that day, you know. And yet Jesus would say, do not lay up treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, with thieves break in and steal, but lay up your treasures in heaven. And ultimately, because where your treasure is, there is your heart also. It's never a waste to God. It might be a waste to some people, but never to God. Mark it down. Whenever you give that which is most valuable in your life to the Lord in terms of your heart, in terms of time and talent and treasure, some will consider your gift to be a waste. They really will. But the worth of Jesus is immeasurable. It cannot be calculated. Nothing is too valuable for him or too extravagant for them. And if you don't know this now, if you're blessed to one day be in eternity with him, you'll know that the price tag was very small of what you put in to what you'll get back, to how you're going to be blessed because of this extravagant love that Jesus has shared with us. And that's where we come to the end of the lesson. The reason for this extravagancy that was in the life of Mary that I hope is starting for you to think about is the extravagant sacrificial love of Jesus, an extravagant expression of love on the cross. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes should not perish but have everlasting life. God demonstrates his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Jesus poured out his life on the cross. A few moments ago, you partook of the Lord's Supper in Matthew the 26th chapter and verse 28. Jesus said, this is my blood of the covenant which is poured out for the many, for the forgiveness of sins. Jesus poured out his blood on the cross. Extravagant, boundless. It was seen in his action and in his passion for you and for me. Some might say that Jesus was, his gift on the cross was an extravagant gift and a waste. But not if you know the love of God. Not if you know of God's demonstration of love for you and for me. The cross is a picture of violence, yet a key to peace. A picture of suffering, yet a key to healing. A picture of death, yet a key to life. A picture of utter weakness, yet the key to power. A picture of capital punishment, and yet the key to mercy and forgiveness. A picture of vicious hatred, and yet the key to love. A picture of supreme shame, and yet the Christian's supreme boast. It's incredible when you think about the extravagant love of Christ. So I was reading about extravagant love, extravagant gifts, and so forth, and I ran across a Charles Schulz cartoon with a peanut gang, you know, and Charlie Brown, he's broke his piggy bank, and he's pulled the money out of it, and the money that he has in his piggy bank is worth $9.11. And he goes to Lucy and he says, I've got $9.11, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy everyone a present. And Lucy says, you can't buy anything for $9.11. And he says, well, I'm sure going to try. And she says, well, whatever you give is going to be cheap. And Charlie Brown said these words that I thought fit so well. He said these words, nothing is cheap if it costs you all you have. And my mind goes back to almost 2,000 years ago when God gave us all he had. He gave us his Son in the person of Jesus Christ. And 33 years later, Jesus would give us all that he had. He'd give us his very life. And now it's our turn to give to Jesus. And what you give should likewise be all that you have, all your heart. And that's an extravagant gift to give. And it's one you can give this morning. Why together we stand and sing, and you contemplate the message.
When the trumpet of the Lord shall sound, and time shall be no more, and the morning breaks eternal, bright and fair. When the saved of earth shall gather over on the other shore, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the